Alright, this was a bad idea, because I could have left this series be what it is, but no, I had to be stubborn and return to it. In early 2020 I went through Dark Souls 2 on NG+7 at Soul Level 1, while focusing on using broken straight swords and a crossbow. Which sounds rough enough, but I also did it without any stat boosting gear. So strict SL1 if you will, where all your stats are at 6 and you can't raise them with artificial levels from what you get from wearing certain armor pieces or rings. So that was a very painful playthrough. Because in this game, your dodge ability, specifically the amount of iframes you have, is linked to your adaptability stat. And at 6 ADP, you have practically no margin of error at all. In fact, a lot of attacks cannot even be dodged through to begin with. So after all this time I decided to continue this playthrough, because I originally only covered the main game, and due to a lapse of sanity, I decided to take this character into the Iron King DLC. The result of which you are watching now, and truth be told, this has been one of the most painful videos I've made so far, for multiple reasons, but one of which is of course the lack of iframes. However, as you can notice from the title of the video, there's something missing this time. Because near the end of the video I had to resort to stat boosting gear, because I just couldn't finish the DLC without it. And not for a lack of trying, I might add. But things really became too time consuming, especially because of the addition of having to complete almost an entire extra game cycle to even have the opportunity to get to the end of this DLC. Because you see, one of the reasons I never bothered with the DLCs in this playthrough is because I used bonfire aesthetics to skip one of the game cycles. So the DLCs were actually still in NG+6. And given that you cannot use bonfire aesthetics when the boss is still alive, I had to either beat the DLCs twice or go into the next game cycle. So obviously I chose the latter option, which already meant having to go through the painful process of making my way through Iron Keep of all places to reach the Iron King DLC again. But even worse, there was a very relevant little detail that I completely forgot about. A certain item that you get near the end of the game that does not carry over into the next game cycle. A specific item that is required to access the third boss of this DLC. So even though in principle this video covers relatively little content, it took ages to produce this video. So yeah, fuck me. So to emphasize again, I dropped the no stat boosting gear restriction only at the very end of the video. So that's why until that point I wasn't using any. Now fortunately you can still boost your health a little bit by using the second dragon ring and the life ring +2, because those don't artificially raise your stats like the prisoner chain for example. Now not that this does that much to begin with on NG+7, but it is helpful with the addition of Gaur's ring that massively reduces damage you take from behind. And on top of that, even with all stats at 6, you can still use a 100% physical defense shield by two-handing it. So that kind of protects you from two sides. Well, emphasis on kind of, because not everything is blockable with this little stamina. And on NG+7, enemies obviously hit you like a truck. Now I will summarize the road towards the boss fights a bit, because to be clear, contrary to most of my videos, this is not meant as a comprehensive guide. In fact, I would not recommend anyone to subject themselves to this kind of self-inflicted torment in the first place. So it's more about explaining how I managed to survive this challenge. Well, sort of survive, I mean, part of you still dies inevitably, I think. But whatever. If you do want a more detailed explanation of how to make it through these sections on SL1, then check out my SL1 Beginner's Guide, where I do in fact cover this part of this particular DLC, even though that video was only about the main game. But we had to go here to pick up certain items. Now having said that, there is a little bit of a difference though, because from NG+ onwards there are some additional red phantom enemies, because there obviously weren't enough enemies in this DLC already. And in Dark Souls 2, running past enemies is a lot trickier, or in some places not even viable to begin with, because contrary to the other games in the series, you don't have iframes while pulling switches, opening doors or going through fork walls. So even if you make it to a switch, if you get hit while pulling it, it will cancel out the animation. Now, Gaur's ring can make a difference, especially in combination with the giant ring +2 for the extra poise. So that might keep the animation going, but that very much depends on the specific attack and the specific enemy that attacks you. So that only gets you so far. Fortunately, other than my broken straight swords, I do have my trusted crossbow. So together with a few bazillion bolts, you can use that to clear out all the enemies in this particular room, which requires a lot of patience. Okay, so if you've seen my SL1 beginner's guide, you know that I ironically forgot to check if every enemy was really dead before going down. So this time, let's be really sure. Alright, so as you can see, everything is clear. Where the fuck did he come from? What the son of a... Well, at least I already pulled the switch, so at least now I can just make a run for it. Oh, and along the way, jump down into the snowy area, because of the enemy throwing those lingering lightning attacks, who would otherwise be blocking your way. And we have more than enough of those to annoy us when we have to make our way towards the scorching iron scepter. Alright then, so we made it to the next bonfire. And also in this area you can pick up the magic quartz ring +3. I already had that one, but the point is that it isn't there for nothing. Because it's going to be vitally important when fighting the Blue Smelter demon later on. Well, in order to access any boss, we need to get the elevators working. And that means making our way down to the iron scepter. Which is even more of a pain in the dick, because it means pulling more switches, while getting chased around by those teleporting, lightning-throwing enemies, and with fire-breathing statues in our way. Yeah, and good luck trying to pull the lever near the giant with the hot and spicy chip on the shoulder, because not only doesn't he leave much room to run past him, because of his giant hitboxes and random lava stream, but if you don't first take out enough of those lightning fuckers, you won't have enough room to first run away from him to begin with. Fortunately, you can at least use those fire-breathing statues to your advantage a little bit, because those lightning fuckers have about a googolplex of HP each, or something like that. At least I rounded it up a bit. But yeah, the point is that it's going to take a while. But eventually you can at least pull the switch, so if nothing else goes wrong, we at least don't have to get past all those bastards again. I mean, it would be a real dick move to put an extra red enemy over there or something, like with a bow and arrow that would completely catch you off guard and ruin your day. Okay, well, at least the gate stays open, so this time we'll run through this section with a shield. Well, that works. So as long as those fat fucks along the way don't decide to blow up, we'll be fine. And my initial idea was to drop down with the cat ring, but I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't have been able to survive that anyway. Fortunately, there is another way to get down, and we definitely don't want to fight the invading NPC. So instead we're going to open up the door leading to the ladder that leads all the way down. And then we're going to do some quick sightseeing until we have the room we need to actually reach that ladder. Because there's another one of those fat exploding fucks behind that door. Alright, and then finally we can pull on the hot rod before the gangbang starts, where everyone blows their load all over us. Not really the kind of stuff you actually want to have out there on the internet, but there you go. Okay then, so with the elevators moving, we can make our way all the way down this tower, where we will have our encounter with Raimi, or Raim, or Raim, whatever, the Fume Knight at least. Named after the fact that you'll be fuming after dying over and over to his broken hitboxes. But along the way there's actually a sort of unofficial shortcut, where you can jump down using the hanging statue. Well, at least you can with stat boosting gear, because not even the cat ring and fall damage reducing armor will allow you to survive with all stats on 6. So yeah, we'll just have to do it the old-fashioned way, I'm afraid. But it shouldn't be too hard. Ah, yeah, you see? First try, like a pro. So, then we can make our way down to the bonfire. And of course, we can't forget to remove all of the Nadalia idols, which the Sims around here don't appreciate. And they probably don't even realize that she only has eye for the massive Chat with his massive... well, it's supposed to be a sword, but it's kind of blunt for a sword, I would say. But anyway, it's finally time to take on the first boss fight of this DLC. And these are long fights, as you would expect. But again, what makes these fights so difficult is not just the length of the fight itself, but that in combination with only 680p. So with so few iframes, you need some incredible precision while rolling, and you need to keep doing that perfectly for about 8 minutes straight. And on top of that, it's not exactly a secret that this game has some really terrible hitboxes, and Fume Knight is no exception. However, Fume Knight also has bad hit detection in your favor, especially in the second phase. And it's the main reason why I almost exclusively move counterclockwise around him. While also in the first phase that is very beneficial because staying behind his left leg will automatically make most of the attacks from his small sword miss you. And you can also avoid getting hit from his great sword because it can actually go over your head, even though sometimes it actually even visually hits you. Although having said that, that depends on two factors, namely your exact position, because you are at the edge of a hitbox after all. So a little too far to the left and you will get hit. But also for some reason, which attack it is within a combo. As a rule of thumb, I always dodge his greatsword if the wide swing is the second attack in a combo. Because for some reason that tends to hit you even when you are behind him. Although again, this is a rule of thumb. In fact, even the slight differences in elevation, given that the floor is not completely level, can play a role in that. Now, there is one major downside to the counterclockwise strategy that you basically have little control over. And that is the angle that Fume Knight approaches you from when initiating the first attack from the combo that starts with the vertical slash from his small sword. Because when he's not facing you dead on, that attack can become undodgeable because of the tracking. Meaning it will go along with your roll, like you have a magnet inside of you, and then it's immediately over. And what sucks is that you can't really control this. The only thing that you can do is to always stay close to him, which can be quite tough because he likes to get close to the edge of the arena. Unfortunately, he jumps away a lot, and when he's guarding, you can actually sort of guide him towards the center of the arena. And you can't attack while he's guarding anyway. Now, when you are behind him, he often does that single backward side swipe with his greatsword, and unless you can avoid it by moving along with it so that you are directly behind him, it's not actually safe to counterattack after that, because he can do it twice in a row, and for some reason I almost always get hit by that second swipe. Which would automatically happen if you are already in an attack animation, obviously. But even if you have the time to dodge again, that same timing doesn't work for some reason. Again, a lot of these hitboxes don't make a lot of sense, and with 680p, that is incredibly noticeable. Whereas with stat boosting gear, because you have a larger margin of error with your timings, you may not even notice these slight differences. It's like the game was play tested with the same amount of iframes as in DS1, and then after all the hitboxes were in place, then the adaptability system was implemented. Which is not an implausible theory if you ask me. Now, a lot of people regard the second phase as the easier phase, but that's absolutely not the case with 680p. At least in my opinion, the first phase is way easier under these conditions. Because you will have to deal with giant hitboxes in the second phase. However, as I said, on his left side, so right from your perspective, they are somehow in your favor. The problem though is that not every attack can be dodged in that direction. For example, for his stab attacks, it's much better to dodge to the left. And the same goes with the slow wide sweeping attack that can only be dodged through to the left and only at the beginning of the animation. And only when you are very close to him. However, because of my tendency to move counterclockwise around him, I do sometimes have to move along with that attack. So then you are basically running from it, so that you won't get clipped at the end of the sweep. But you will notice that by dodging counterclockwise around him, I do sometimes visually connect with his sword, but it doesn't count as a hit. It's a little bit as if the hitboxes are off center. They're a little too far to the left, so to say. Now, without a doubt, his most dangerous attack is his fireball AoE. First of all, the animation where he stabs a sword into the ground is already a hitbox. So if he does it when you are close to him, you immediately have to roll backwards, and then you need to release the lock-on and run away, because you need to move in between the fireballs. And the further you are away from him, the easier it will be to squeeze in between those gaps. Because with 680p, you definitely cannot roll through these fireballs. So here your position in the room is important as well, because if you are with your back against the wall, you obviously cannot run away from the fireballs in that direction. So that is his most dangerous attack, but in general what makes Fume Knight difficult is the fact that he can catch you off guard by occasionally extending his combos. Like how in the first phase, his combos usually end with a wide sweep from his greatsword, but then on occasion he will extend the combo by doing another sweep in the opposite direction. And the same applies to the second phase. So for example, when he does the 2-hit combo that ends in an overhead attack, he will often stop there, but sometimes he will then follow up with a slow sideways attack that extends almost all the way behind him. So you will notice sometimes that I don't attack even when there is a clear opening, or where I first make sure that I move directly behind him before I attack, even though I could get extra hits in if I hadn't. But that is because I need to take these combo extensions into account. I mean, you cannot look into the future after all. Now, one thing that is different in this fight than in all other fights before it, is that I'm actually using a raw infused broken straight sword and a magic buff. This is because both Fume Knight and Sir Alonne have such high elemental resistances that even an unbuffed raw broken straight sword does a bit more damage than one with an elemental infusion. And why do I use aromatic ooze? Well, because that doesn't actually matter. There's some confusion on the wikis regarding Fume Knight's elemental defenses, but it's very easy to test for me with my infused broken straight swords. Fume Knight has the exact same amount of elemental defenses for magic, lightning and dark. It literally doesn't matter which of those elements you use. The confusion probably comes in when you have a build where you add more of a particular element than of another. But his defenses are the same for those 3 damage types. Only fire does less damage. He is highly resistant to fire. Now, Fume Knight doesn't give you much opportunities to buff though, so whenever I'm not close enough to dodge through the beginning of his slow sweeping attack, I instead dodge away from it, so that I have the opportunity to rebuff. In fact, I even do that when my buff hasn't run out yet, because I don't know when I will get another opportunity. And one last thing, as shitty as the broken straight swords are, as was already clear in the main game, the one benefit they have is low stamina consumption. And you're constantly dodging in this fight, so at the very least this weapon does allow you to get quite a few hits in. And by power stancing, if you are low in stamina you can go for a single R1, or when you have more stamina available when attacking, or when you can get only a single attack in to begin with, you can go for an L1 or even L2 attack for maximum damage. And that's very helpful because Fume Knight has over 30,000 HP on Nukem+7. So yeah, that's a lot. It's actually possible to get killed by that enemy outside entering the arena after the fog wall dissipates. Which is definitely a kick in the nuts right after surviving that onslaught from such a tough boss. And we do need to collect our prize after all before we continue. Namely the crown of the Old Iron King. Which you would think would be what you get at the end of the DLC. But you cannot access Sir Alonne without it. Yeah, and as I said before, actually you cannot access him without something else either. But more about that later. Still, speaking of Sir Alonne, I actually went the wrong way initially, because I completely forgot that the Iron Key is necessary to access him as well. You need that key to access both remaining bosses. However, Blue Smelter is closer by anyway, so let's go there first. Now, the key is guarded by a shit ton of enemies, so here's another example of how the protective power of Gaur's Ring can quite literally save your ass. You know, as it protects you from behind after all, and that's typically where your ass is located. So, fancy that. Well, but when it comes to the road towards Smelter Demon, nothing can protect your ass. Because Gaur's Ring will not do you that much good. Even if you make it through the fog wall, you won't get the opportunity to switch out your gear for obvious reasons. And because safe quitting doesn't actually reposition and de-aggro the enemies in this game, this is simply not going to work. So, unfortunately, now let the immense tedium commence. We're going to slowly and repeatedly take out the majority of the enemies along the way with the help of the 2 NPC bodies. This area was meant as a multiplayer area after all, which is why there is such a ridiculous amount of enemies here. And we need a way to get safely to the fog wall with all the gear that we need for the Blue Smelter Demon fight already equipped. Unfortunately, even with these NPCs, you will likely not be able to get rid of the enemies directly in front of the fog wall, so that is still a major pain in the ass. Well, as if that entire process wasn't painful enough, because of Smelter Demon's automatically damaging magic aura, you cannot be in RTSR range for this fight, making our damage output even lower. So we need something to provide additional damage, and that is why I have 2 pieces of the butterfly set equipped. Not the wings unfortunately, because I do need the witch's robe for the magic protection, so that my small life bar won't drain too quickly. I mean, even with the life ring plus 2 equipped and the magic quartz ring plus 3, you still take a lot of automatic magic damage in this fight. But with 2 pieces of the butterfly set equipped, instead of fighting fire with fire, we are fighting magic with poison. Because now we have an automatically damaging aura as well. Sure, it's not that effective, because the build-up is very slow and the poison doesn't stay active for that long. But it will certainly help to deal with this giant life bar, when we don't have the damage boost from RTSR and the Bright Bug. So every little bit helps. And I can speed it up with my poison-infused Broken Straight Sword if necessary. Now, if you have seen part 3 of this series, where I fought the red Smelter Demon, you notice that I'm using a very different strategy this time, which seems far less effective, and in a way it kinda is, because against the original Smelter Demon I fought without lock-on, and I constantly moved around him to attack him from behind. However, Blue Smelter is not merely a magic version of the original fire version. The blue version has different timings on his attacks, making him highly unpredictable as he can delay or speed up his attacks at any time. It's not that the same strategy would not have worked, but getting around him consistently without getting clipped at the edge of his hitboxes is far more difficult in this fight. And the thing is that other than the timing differences, his regular sword slashes are not that difficult to roll through with low ADP. Only if you dodge along with them, but fortunately most of the time your second dodge will get you out of the second swing's hitbox altogether. So that's usually not a big problem. What is a major problem though, is his overhead attack. I think we all know how stupidly large that hitbox is. It's way larger than the sword itself, even without the magic aura in the third phase. However, contrary to what you might think, it's not the case that it's a lingering hitbox. The reason you get hit at the end of your roll is simply because of its illogical size. It's not that it lingers. So that means that there are 2 ways to dodge it. Extremely strict timing, where you dodge at the very last moment when the sword is about to hit you. Because if you dodge too early, you will be out of iframes when you are still within the giant hitbox. Even though visually you don't connect with the sword at all. Thank you B-Team, fuck you too. Or the alternative way, which is far less consistent, is to diagonally dodge into him, so that his movement will literally push you outside of the hitbox. However, in the end, with this hitbox, sometimes when you think you've done it perfectly, you will still die. And ironically, sometimes when you think you dodged too early, you somehow don't get hit. And that actually can throw you off. In fact, in this very fight, I thought I dodged one of those overhead attacks too early and expected to die, and yet I survived. And I almost didn't react in time to his next attack because I was so damn surprised that I was still alive. Seriously folks, that hitbox was farted straight out of the very bowels of hell itself. And it just ruins an otherwise pretty cool fight. Now, when it comes to dodging through his regular sword slashes, as I said, iframes aren't really the issue here. It's the constant slight variations in timing that the Red Smelter demon does not have. But the main thing to consider is that when you dodge through 2 side slashes, you cannot immediately counterattack, because you need to wait to see if he does a jump attack. Because if he does, you can't dodge when you're already in an attack animation. So you need to always wait a split second before attacking to see if he jumps or not. By the way, the hitbox on the jump attack is inconsistent as well. So even when you think you won't get hit, it's still best to simply roll. However, you can actually use that jump attack to your advantage, because when he jumps, that is the perfect opportunity to use an Elizabeth mushroom. Because that item heals you for a very long time, and by quite an amount per tick. It cannot fully out-heal the constant magic damage though, so you cannot simply always stay close to him. And you cannot stack mushrooms like you can do with life gems. Also, there's a bright sound when the mushroom wears off, so that will let you know that you need to stay out of the aura until you can use another one. However, make sure to have all life gems in your quick bar for emergency situations, because that animation is quite a bit quicker. And on top of that, it stacks with the mushroom. And of course, blue bursts will add to the magic defense of the Witch's Robe and the Magic Quartz Ring. This DLC also has the Dispelling Ring +1. However, I rather have the small health boost from the Life Ring +2 instead of a not all that noticeable boost in magic resistance. So yeah, it's quite an intense fight where you constantly need to manage your health and healing items while watching out for the variations in timings of his attacks. And always be ready for the overhead attack, where all your muscles will just clench because you need to roll in that very small window where you can actually iframe that attack. Or still die if the game feels like it. So, yeah. But again, at least the poison helps out a bit. But still, it's a long ass fight this way. Okay, so my initial idea was to lure the invading NPCs towards the elevator to push them off one by one. But that's completely unnecessary, as you can quite easily run past them by two-handing a shield while having Gower's ring equipped. And it's not exactly a long road towards the next bonfire, contrary to the road towards Sir Alonne himself. Well, again, having said that, speaking of having to traverse a long road, as I mentioned before, this is actually on the next new game cycle after the main game, because the DLCs were one cycle behind due to bonfire aesthetics. So I explained before that I went into the next game cycle to get all 3 of them to New Game Plus 7. But I had not taken into account that in order to enter the memory world of Sir Alonne, that I would need the Ashen Heart Mist, which you lose when going into the next game cycle. And you can only get it from the Ancient Dragon. So that means that in order to get to Sir Alonne, I would almost have to beat the entire game again.
Many unbearable hours later.
Well, with all that tedium finally behind us, well, let's go through the tedium of repeatedly clearing away all the enemies in this area to give myself a sort of safe road towards the boss. Because they put 2 of these types of areas in this DLC for some reason. Again, thank you B-Team, fuck you very much. Well, fortunately, at least contrary to the Blue Smelter demon, if you can make your way to the fog wall, you can actually do a safe quit, and the enemy closest to the fog wall, 9 out of 10 times, will move away from you, and that will allow you to get your gear ready for the actual boss fight. But speaking of this boss fight, and speaking of the gear that I'm using, this is where shit really hits the fan. This is where finally, after all the boss fights in this playthrough, the lack of iframes became too much to handle, at least within a reasonable time frame. And to even get to this point, I have far exceeded a reasonable time frame already. So I had to either change damage output, range, or give up the restriction of no stat boosting gear to raise my ADP with.
Yes! I finally realized that I can't do it! I can't do it, Mr. Krabs! I'm a failure! I can't do it. I can't do it, Squidward.
What I will show you now is the best attempt I had, which was really close. And if you're familiar with this fight, you will immediately notice that I'm implementing some very weird strategies here. I fight him without a lock-on, which looks like an immense pain in the ass, because Sir Alonne moves around so much that it becomes a nightmare to control the camera while avoiding him. But I eventually had to go for a strategy like this, because his hitboxes are too messed up to deal with only 6 ADP. No matter how hard I tried, it's just not consistent enough. Any strategy I tried only worked to a certain extent, but nothing worked consistently. So basically you would get really far and think, oh, well, this works pretty well. Until out of nowhere an attack suddenly connects anyway. And yes, the difference between 6 and 14 ADP makes a difference. Not a small difference, a ginormous fucking difference. I seriously would rather fight him with the Broken Ladle with the Champion Covenant active, but at least with stat boosting gear, which the Ladle is by the way, than to fight him with Broken Straight Swords with only 6 ADP. It just doesn't work. I have tried everything and every single strategy works only some of the time, and that is the problem. Inevitably, due to the length of the fight, at some point you will get hit for seemingly no reason. So this strategy that I use here is the best one I could come up with, and it's based on a no-roll strat. It obviously isn't a no-roll strat, but that's what it's based on. It's specifically based around getting the most consistent way to avoid 5 specific attacks. One is the charge attack that he can do at different speeds, which is why I dodge away from it. Yes, you can dodge to his side, but the difficulty there is the difference in speed. However, the fastest version can still out of nowhere hit you. Now with 14 ADP, you have that margin of error necessary to save yourself with your iframes. With only 6, that's not going to happen. At least not multiple times, given how long this fight is. The second attack that will constantly get you killed is the same issue with Fume Knight, and that's the vertical slash that he can start a combo with. Depending on the angle he approaches you from, that attack can have perfect tracking. So it's basically like a magnet. Impossible to iframe with 6 ADP. In fact, even with full stat boosting gear, that's still an incredibly dangerous attack. Then there is a sideways slash that he often uses when he runs towards you. And he can also do it when you're right in front of him, and it's really fast, so it's very hard to recognize. Then there's this dark sword attack, and as you notice, I don't even dodge through it anymore. Because again, the issue is consistency. Because yes, you can iframe it, until suddenly the game decides, nah, it's gonna hit you this time. So instead I use a very tricky but at least more consistent approach by moving away just in front of the tip of his sword. However, when you then counterattack, if you are even a few frames too late, he can recover too quickly and do his next attack before you come out of your attack animation. In fact, that is what got me killed here. So the greatest irony here is that I did not actually die because of lack of iframes. Oh, and speaking of stab attacks, none of those hitboxes are consistent. So you can die from one of those without it visually connecting. And what's worse, he can do that occasionally instead of a charge attack. So that's why preemptively rolling to avoid the fastest version of the charge attack doesn't work. Because if he does a stab instead of a charge, then that will get you killed instead. And finally, if you are familiar with this fight at all, you probably already know this, his jump attack. That hitbox makes no sense at all. Essentially, I think it's supposed to be that there's a shockwave around him, because it can hit you even though visually you don't get hit by anything. So to emphasize again, the key word here is consistency. Any direction, any timing, any strat might work until it out of nowhere suddenly doesn't work anymore. That's the problem here. And that's why the jump from 6 ADP to 14 ADP from stat boosting gear makes such a giant difference, because it grants you that little margin of error to deal with that inconsistency. In fact, with higher ADP, this fight is not bad at all. In fact, I actually really like this boss. But with 6 ADP, you either need a better weapon or the ability to take damage. So it's a combination that just made it too much to handle without spending way more time on it than it would be worth to spend on this one fight. Especially given what it took to even get to this point.
don't need it. I definitely don't need it. I 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 need it!
So, eventually I just had to throw in the towel and equip stat boosting gear. So now let's see how this fight is with the Mad Warrior Mask, the Peasant Gloves and the Simpleton Ring, which gives me 15 ADP. So 14 effectively, because the amount of iframes you gain from ADP goes in jumps. So the next extension would be at 20. So here I approach the fight as you would expect it to see, with lock on and dodging through his attacks to get to his side. Now I still dodge backwards generally when he does the charge attack, because remember he can do that at a variety of different speeds. So there is a real danger of dodging too early, which sometimes is actually not even a problem. But another problem with consistency is the tracking that move has. So sometimes it has perfect tracking, and sometimes you dodge a full second too early and it misses you. But despite that, now the fight actually feels like it actually functions like it should. Because now you don't suddenly die because the game tells you to go fuck yourself. I really cannot emphasize enough that the difference from 6 to 14 ADP makes in this fight. It's really, really noticeable. And I mean, it's still a hard fight this way, because Alonne is really fast, constantly jumps around, constantly varies the timing of his attacks, and your stamina management really has to be on point because of that. But now it's at least a very enjoyable fight. Well, the hitbox on his jump attack is still bullshit, that remains. Now, as a general rule, just like Fume Knight, it can help to stay behind his left leg, because a lot of his regular slashes will then automatically miss you, allowing you to get free hits in. But also like Fume Knight, Alonne can extend his combos on occasion. For example, when he gains a jump attack, most of the times that is a single attack. But sometimes he will follow up with a slow charging sideswipe, which is an attack he can also do after a regular 2-hit combo. So when you're sticking behind him, that's always something to keep in mind. Now, because it's a slow attack, you can actually squeeze an attack in between the 2-hit combo and that attack. But the point is that you cannot keep attacking when he does that. So yeah, in conclusion, as frustrating as Alonne was, I did not grow to hate this fight, because a lot of the inconsistency in the hit detection is only really noticeable at 6 ADP. It's extremely noticeable then. But unlike the Throne Wanker and the Throne Defecator, I didn't just immediately decide to break the rules, because I excluded those fuckers from the rules before I even started this playthrough, because that's a fight I genuinely hate. I mean, I wouldn't piss on those guys if they were on fire, unless I had like magically flammable piss or something. But Alonne, he's a cool boss. Just not with 6 ADP. But of course, I do realize that it was my own stupid decision to exclude iframing boosting gear from this run in the first place. So yeah, I'm dumb and don't do this to yourself. So, yeah. It sucks that I had to break the rules to finish this video, or otherwise spend way more time on it than it would be functional or healthy, I should probably say. And if I decide to continue with the other 2 DLCs, maybe again in a year and a half from now, I think I should be smart enough to just drop the no stat boosting gear restriction from the start. Well, at least now, after all this, I can put my pretty dress back on. Which always makes me feel better. Well, not in real life, of course, I'm talking about my character. Well, then again, given my audience, that might actually be a way to get more views. Okay, you know, I think that's the end of this video. So, thank you for watching, subscribe for more, consider becoming a Patreon supporter if you want early access, and don't try this at home, kids. Please, just don't.